and welcome to this lecture in our Alumni Leadership Lecture Series. Today's speaker is Ravi Pratap. He is from the 2001 batch, Chemical Engineering. And like many chemical engineers, he has chosen to deviate from his discipline and go into other things. So he's the co-founder of MobStac, a young technology startup in Bangalore. Before that, he was at Hillcrest Labs, which is a technology startup based in Washington, D.C., and he was managing its software products group. He actually learned how to run a startup when he was with Hillcrest Labs, since he was doing everything from production engineering to customer program management to offshore strategy to trade show marketing, etc. He has an MS in computer science from Washington University in St. Louis. He is a compulsive technologist and has contributed a lot of code and effort to many open source projects. And so he's going to talk about his journey from being a hacker to an entrepreneur. I'm sure that it's a topic of great interest to all of you. So I welcome Ravi.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Before I get started, I just wanted to say that it's an absolute privilege and an honor to be here on this stage, which is arguably one of IITM's most famous stages, the Central Lecture Theatre. And I was thinking about it earlier today, and I'm back here on this stage after a couple of years, and for a change, I'm actually doing something a little different. The last time I was here, I was, not precisely the last time. The last time I was here, when I was still on campus, I was participating in Western music and being judged by Professor L.S. Ganesh, who's not here right now. But I was also part of some stagecoach plays, so doing theater. And I was actually at a soapbox. I stood for elections and I lost, but that was part of the experience at IIT. So there were a number of things that I was doing differently last time. But it's really quite an honor and a privilege to be part of the leadership lecture series that has been instituted. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here and for being able to address students at IIT today. And so thank you again for that opportunity. I was thinking about what it is that I can talk to you guys about and girls about. What is it that I can lecture you on, so to speak. And I really couldn't think of anything that I could really say which you probably won't hear from someone else. So I thought about it and I said, perhaps the best thing that I should really do is talk about my story. How I went from being one of you sitting here in an extramural lecture and being an open source hacker and doing all those things back at college and all the way to where I am today, which is being an entrepreneur who started a company, a product company in Bangalore, and all the things in between, basically. I thought I'll just spend some time telling you my story, and then you guys can ask me any questions you want at the end. So that's what I'll do today. I have a couple of slides that will help you just stay focused on what I'm saying, because maybe there are some interesting pictures in here, and so yeah, that's what this is really about. I want to tell you my story. Little bit about me, in terms of what I've done at IIT in particular. I used to be part of the water polo team for Ganga. I also sang on the IIT rock band. I was lead vocalist. And I also set up the Chemical Engineering Departmental Computing Facility, also known as the DCF. Anybody here use the DCF? Chemi DCF? Oh, wow, I'm impressed. Thank you so much for still using it. I actually found out today that things are very different from when I was on campus. Apparently, everyone has computers of their own in their rooms, and the only thing that students really require these days is connectivity, which is internet access. You don't really need a facility which has computers and computing power and some really good infrastructure. Apparently, all you need to do is provide wireless and internet access, and you're set, which is great, because in our time, there was exactly one computer, one old Intel 486 in one room somewhere in the chemical engineering facility, which the entire department of chemical engineering was supposed to use when it needed to. And usually that was reserved for final year students. So that was how it was when I joined, but by the time we left IIT, we had set up a chemical engineering DCF. At that time, it was 10 computers, and then later on, I think it became much larger. I don't know if it's depleted again in size, but anyway, that's what I did. I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world. I've lived in many different cities, many in the US, many in India, and so I have a couple of interesting experiences from there. I'll share those, and that's pretty much it. I think my work history you'll anyway find out during the course of this talk, so I'll let that just come. I won't delve into that right now. And yes, last but not the least, I'm Hyderabadi. So I grew up in Hyderabad before I came to IIT. And from there, I've never lived in Hyderabad again, but anyway, that's life. So I came to campus in 1997, which may be an eternity for some of you. I just hope that some of you were actually born at that time. But anyway, in 97, I came to campus, and actually, I was not the only one from my school. These are my two friends in the picture. One is Sharath, who's in the middle, who's also the one I started the company with, MobStac. And the one who's on the rightmost one is also my classmate from school. The three of us, this is a picture at Sarang, 1999. And we were on campus. It was our first year, or actually the first 2 years. And it was a time that I was actually still trying to discover myself. I was trying to find my feet at IIT. There's a lot that I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, right? You come to campus, first time you're out of home, and you're used to being like the smartest kid in class, and you come here and discover that's not necessarily the case anymore. And then you find that there's all these opportunities, right? There's avenues to do cultural things, there's avenues to do a lot of academics, everything in between, all other extracurricular activities depending on your interests. You know, some people were interested in girls a lot, so they used to spend a lot of time at Sarayu. And so all these things would essentially would really just hit you when you join IIT and when you just came to college, basically. The thing that I was trying to figure out at that time was whether I should really be doing chemical engineering. And I came to the conclusion that Chemi happened to be a consequence of my JEE rank. And so when I realized that, when I said, okay, if Chemi is not what my calling is, because clearly it isn't, because I had actually been doing computers for years before that. So in fact, I wrote my first program in C when I was in 8th grade, and I remember learning C++ and writing some Java code when I was in 10th grade. So that's how much I had loved computer science, but it turned out because of my JEE rank, I was in Chemi. So when I found out, or I should say realized really, that this is it, you know, I'm not going to do Chemi. I know that computer science is my calling. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. I said, okay, now let's see, what is it that I can do about it? I mean, I still have to get through the chemical engineering department, obviously make it with a decent grade point average. But what is it that I can do to really differentiate myself, right? So that was what I was figuring out. In the first 2 years, or 18 months, I should say, what should I do with my life? That's what I wanted to know. And I always have gone back to this particular quote, which I'm sure many of you know. It's something I came across when I was in 8th class in my history lesson. We were studying ancient Chinese philosophers, Lao Tzu and Confucius and all of them. And there's this quote by Confucius which is stuck in my head ever since I read it that day. It says, find a job you love and you'll never work a single day in your life. That's what it said back then. And when I was in 8th class, I was really moved by it. I was like, wow, this is amazing, right? Such a perfect formula to be happy for the rest of your life. And this is something that I've used all through my life, right? When I had to decide at IITM, what is it that I want to do? Do I really have to pursue this path or should I do something in between? This helped me decide. I said, I love computers. I love building programs and writing programs and doing something interesting with it. I've been doing it for years. I should just continue down that path. And so I took the decision, which was actually a much harder path for me. I was a chemistry student who had very average grades. There was no way I would get a branch change to computer science because already it was past the first year. And how do I get to where I wanted to be? And I was competing with everyone in computer science anyway. They're all the top ranks in JEE. They all had the 9-point average GPAs. They were going to apply to the same companies and they're going to apply to the same universities that I wanted to go to. So I had to do something about it. But I realized that I had an uphill task. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it because I love it. And because I love it, I'll never work a day in my life. The thing that really just changed my life in terms of what I was able to do is I discovered open source. In 1999, I used to use the computer center a lot. At that time, unlike now, we had to use common facilities. And for a particular reason, because I was on the first IITM website project ever, when IITM.ac.in first came up, I was part of that initial team. I worked with Professor R. Kalyanakrishnan and a group of others from my batch. And when I was on that team, I got access to a particular computer space in the computer center, and I started exploring, and that's how I discovered open source. I was like fascinated by Linux, because that's what I used to use on that computer. I was fascinated by its origins, fascinated by where it had come from and how it was evolving. And so the thing that really fascinated me about open source was you can learn by doing. Open source is actually one of those environments where it's brutal. If you get in, it's pure merit. If you can write code, your code will be accepted and you'll be respected. If you can't write code, you'll be trashed and you'll be told to get lost. Not in those words exactly, but roughly speaking, that's how it works in open source. Now, that is not to say that open source programmers and open source enthusiasts won't help you out. They're a very helpful community. They're very, they're actually very good at organizing themselves online and virtually. And so all these things were great for me because I said, I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn from doing open source. And I ended up joining the GNOME project. How many of you use Linux on your desktops? Okay, reasonable number. The rest are all Windows, I imagine, unless you're all Mac. And what about people who use GNOME on their desktop environment? Anybody use GNOME? Okay, a couple of people. There are actually millions of people worldwide who use GNOME. GNOME is a desktop environment, a graphical UI for Linux. And I actually joined that project. I wrote code that is still to this day is still inside GNOME. If you ever open a PDF in GNOME, my code is involved, basically, amongst other things. And so I wrote code in the GNOME project. And actually, at that time, there's something interesting happened. It turns out that I was one of the few people in all of India who was contributing to open source, and in particular, the GNOME project at that time. And so I put this picture on the screen to show you that actually I went to this conference in Copenhagen, which is in Denmark, and my trip was sponsored. They said that, actually I'll explain the story of how I got there, but I ended up getting a chance to go and meet the people who had created GNOME, who had created these open source projects. So in that picture there, I don't know if you can recognize me, I don't think it's that hard. The one on my right is Miguel de Casa. Miguel de Casa is a guy from Mexico originally, he lives in the US now. He's the founder of GNOME. I was sitting next to him and I got a chance to meet him, someone who had started this whole movement and who had taken it from just a small project that he was doing at the University of Mexico to something that was massive and had global contribution and adoption to a large extent. GNOME had become really big by that point in terms of corporates and corporate adoption, in terms of how much money was being pumped into it. I got a chance to go there and meet all these interesting people. In fact, the guy who created the KDE desktop environment, which is the competing one, is actually across the table. The guy in the blue shirt is looking at the camera. And so I met all these people. I met them in person, and I created these networks. I created these connections to people that I had worked with only virtually until that point. And the thing that I really take away from all those open source experiences, right, is that was where I learned to build products. How to take an idea that you have and take it to something which is tangible, which is a software product or whatever it is that may be the case.